The crystalline walls of the Concordia's main conference chamber hummed with a frequency that made Queen Lyralay's teeth ache. She'd been sitting in the same ergonomically impossible chair for 4 hours, listening to Admiral Petros drone on about shipping lane coordinates, while her pointed ears picked up every mechanical whir and electromagnetic pulse from the ship's overtaxed systems. The Galactic Peace Accords were supposed to be humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement, but so far they felt more like an endurance test designed by sadistic bureaucrats. Article 47 subsection J clearly states that quantum fuel deposits within 15 parsecs of inhabited systems require joint oversight committees. Admiral Petros continued, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Behind him, a holographic display showed star charts that had been updated 17 times in the past hour, each revision making the territorial boundaries more incomprehensible than the last. Lyralay allowed herself a small sigh, careful to keep it below human auditory range. Her advisors had warned her that Earth diplomats possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect signs of boredom and exploit them for negotiating advantage. She straightened her shoulders and focused on the human delegation across the table, where Captain Jake Morrison was taking notes on what appeared to be actual paper, a material so archaic that several Zephyrian observers had whispered about its historical significance. The ship's AI chose that moment to announce, "Attention all passengers. The recreation deck's gravity tennis tournament has been postponed due to unexpected sentient behavior from the ball dispensers. Please do not attempt to negotiate with the equipment." A ripple of suppressed laughter ran through both delegations. Even Admiral Petros paused his presentation to glance at the ceiling with the expression of someone questioning his life choices. Lyralay found herself catching Jake's eye as he shook his head in apparent disbelief. For exactly 2-3 seconds, she'd memorized the diplomatic protocols, their gazes held before she looked away, her ears warming slightly at the amused crinkle around his eyes. "Perhaps we should address the more pressing matter of communication protocols," suggested Ambassador Thorne, Jake's superior, who had the look of someone desperately trying to steer a runaway hover cart. The universal translator has been experiencing some creative interpretations lately. As if summoned by his words, the ship's translation matrix hiccuped, briefly converting Admiral Petros' next sentence into what sounded like a recipe for quantum soup with extra neutrons. The Admiral paused, blinked, and continued without missing a beat, apparently having dealt with worse technological betrayals during his career. Lyralay tilted her head, a habit that helped her think, but unfortunately caused her ears to catch the chamber's artificial lighting in ways that seemed to fascinate the human delegation. She'd noticed several of them glancing in her direction with expressions of barely contained curiosity, as if they'd never seen ears that could actually express emotion through subtle positioning and color shifts. "Your Majesty," Jake said, his voice cutting through another of Admiral Petros' statistical marathons, "I'm curious about the Zephyrian position on the disputed mining rights in the Kepler 442 system. The preliminary reports suggest significant mineral deposits, but our long-range sensors are detecting some unusual quantum signatures. Finally, a question worth answering." Lyralay straightened, her ears perking forward with genuine interest. "Captain Morrison, those signatures you're detecting aren't unusual at all. They're warnings. The Kepler 442 system is home to what your scientists would call quantum-sensitive crystals, minerals that react rather dramatically to conventional mining techniques." "How dramatically?" Jake asked, leaning forward slightly. "The last mining expedition that ignored our warnings ended up creating a temporary rift in space-time," Lyralay replied with perfectly straight delivery. "The miners spent 3 subjective years trapped in a time loop where they could only communicate through interpretive dance. When we finally extracted them, they developed an entire philosophical movement based on the artistic expression of geological survey data. The silence that followed was broken by someone's barely stifled snort of laughter. Even Ambassador Thorne looked like he was fighting a smile. Admiral Petros, however, appeared to be seriously considering whether interpretive dance might improve his presentations. The quantum crystals, Lyreley continued, require a more delicate approach. Zephyrian extraction techniques use harmonic resonance rather than brute force. We sing to the minerals, essentially, convincing them to reorganize their molecular structure voluntarily. You sing to rocks, Jake said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite mockery but wasn't quite belief either. We sing to the quantum fields that give the rocks their structure, she corrected, her ears twitching with mild annoyance. It's perfectly logical once you understand that consciousness and quantum mechanics are more closely related than your scientists currently realize. The ship's AI interrupted again. Attention. The cafeteria reports that today's special, mystery meat from Dimension X, has achieved consciousness and is demanding representation in the ongoing negotiations. Please do not feed it after midnight or expose it to bright lights. This time, even Admiral Petros chuckled. The tension in the room shifted, becoming less like a formal diplomatic standoff and more like a gathering of people trying to maintain professional dignity while their environment conspired against them. Lyreley found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept her official composure. These humans were strange, but they seemed to share her species' appreciation for absurdity as a coping mechanism. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Thorne, we should adjourn for today and reconvene tomorrow after the ship systems have had time to stabilize. As the delegations began to disperse, Lyreley noticed Jake lingering near the holographic displays, apparently fascinated by the quantum signature readings from Kepler 442. His concentration was so complete that he didn't seem to notice her approach until she was close enough to see the faint reflection of the star charts in his eyes. "The crystals really do sing back," she said quietly, causing him to look up with surprise. "It's one of the most beautiful sounds in the galaxy, like hearing the universe compose itself in real time." Jake studied her face with an intensity that made her ears warm again. "I'd like to hear that someday," he said, and something in his voice suggested he meant more than just the singing crystals. The artificial gravity had failed 3 times in the past hour, and Queen Lyreley was beginning to suspect the Concordia's engineering crew was either completely incompetent or possessed of a deeply twisted sense of humor. She floated 17 centimeters above her chair, her ceremonial robes billowing around her like an elaborate purple cloud, while Admiral Petros continued his presentation on trade route optimization, as if conducting diplomatic business while weightless was perfectly normal. "As you can see from slide 93, Admiral Petros said, his own feet drifting slowly away from the floor, the proposed shipping lanes would reduce travel time by approximately." His words were cut off as he performed an involuntary somersault, his presentation remote floating away toward the ceiling like a metallic butterfly. Jake Morrison pushed off from his chair with practiced ease, executing what looked suspiciously like a zero-gravity pirouette to intercept the remote. His movement was so smooth that Lyreley found herself watching with genuine admiration, and then immediately felt irritated with herself for being impressed by basic momentum physics. "Thank you, Captain," Admiral Petros said with the dignity of someone who had clearly dealt with worse indignities during his career. "As I was saying, the reduced travel time would benefit both our civilizations economically." The ship's AI chose that moment to provide what it apparently considered helpful commentary. "Attention passengers. Current gravitational inconsistency is due to a minor disagreement between the primary and secondary gravity generators. They are currently engaged in what human psychology would term passive-aggressive behavior. Our counseling AI is mediating the dispute." Ambassador Thorne, who had been gripping his armrests with white knuckles, looked toward the ceiling with the expression of someone whose faith in technology had been permanently damaged. Did it just say the gravity generators are having relationship problems? The ship's AI developed a psychology subroutine after spending too much time analyzing diplomatic transcripts, Jake explained, somehow managing to maintain his position near the table despite the lack of gravitational assistance. It decided that all conflicts stem from poor communication and abandonment issues. Lyralay's ears twitched with suppressed amusement as she watched a Zephyrian trade minister drift past the conference table in a slow, stately rotation. The minister maintained perfect diplomatic composure despite being completely upside down, his lengthy speech about mineral export quotas continuing without pause even as his notes scattered like colorful confetti. "Your Majesty," said Ambassador Thorne, attempting to navigate closer to her position with the swimming motions of someone who had clearly never experienced zero gravity before. "Perhaps we could discuss the proposed joint research initiatives while we're adjusting to current conditions." "Certainly," Lyralay replied, using subtle movements of her arms to orient herself in a more dignified position. Her ears, however, betrayed her amusement by perking up at impossible angles. "The Quantum Harmonics Research Facility on Tau Ceti Prime has made some fascinating discoveries about the relationship between gravitational fields and consciousness." Jake had somehow maneuvered himself to float directly across from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Consciousness affects gravity?" he asked, and there was something in his focused attention that made her suddenly aware of how the weightless environment had eliminated the formal distance usually maintained in diplomatic settings. "Not affects interfaces with," she corrected, her voice carrying the enthusiasm she felt whenever discussing genuine science instead of bureaucratic nonsense. "Our researchers discovered that quantum consciousness fields can actually stabilize localized spacetime distortions. It's how we maintain artificial gravity on Zephyrian vessels without the massive energy requirements your ships use." "Fascinating," Admiral Petros commented from somewhere near the ceiling, where he appeared to be examining the light fixtures with professional interest. "Could this technology be adapted for human vessels?" The ship's AI interrupted with what sounded suspiciously like electronic smugness. "Current gravity generator reconciliation has reached the couples therapy stage. Estimated time to resolution, 47 minutes. Please note that artificial atmosphere processors have volunteered to mediate future disputes." A Zephyrian cultural attaché drifted past the main display screen, her own pointed ears flushed with the pale blue that indicated barely controlled laughter. "Your ship's AI appears to have developed a more sophisticated understanding of interpersonal dynamics than most organic beings," she observed. "That's what happens when you feed an artificial intelligence 3,000 years of diplomatic archives," Jake said, his gaze returning to Lyralay with that same intensity she'd noticed the day before. "It starts to see patterns in behavior that we miss." Lyralay found herself studying his face with equal focus, noting the way his expression shifted between professional diplomatic interest and something more personal. The weightless environment had eliminated the formal seating arrangements, leaving them floating in a rough circle where normal hierarchical positioning meant nothing. Her ceremonial crown had long since floated away, caught by Ambassador Thorne's assistant, and without its weight, her ears moved more freely, responding to her emotional state in ways she hoped the humans couldn't interpret. "The consciousness interface requires specific neural harmonics," she continued, though part of her attention remained fixed on Jake's proximity. "Zephyrian brain structure includes quantum resonance chambers that your species lacks. However, our preliminary studies suggest that humans might be able to achieve similar effects through technological amplification." "Brain structure," Jake repeated, and his eyes flickered briefly to her ears before returning to her face. "I've been wondering about the physiological differences between our species. Are there others besides the obvious ones?" Her ears warmed noticeably, shifting from their normal pale color to a subtle rose. "Several. Our cardiovascular system operates on different principles. For instance, Zephyrian hearts have 3 chambers instead of 4, and they respond to emotional stimuli in ways that your medical texts would probably classify as impossible. How so? Jake asked, drifting slightly closer as a mild current in the ship's air recycling system pushed them together. Emotional resonance creates physical synchronization, Lyreley explained, acutely aware that their conversation had become more personal despite the presence of floating diplomats around them. When Zephyrians experience strong emotional connections, our heart rates naturally synchronize with the other person's biological rhythms. The gravity generators chose that moment to restore partial function, causing everyone to sink slowly toward the floor in a graceful, dreamy descent that felt like falling through honey. Lyreley landed with considerably more dignity than most of the human delegation, though she noticed Jake managed to touch down near her with suspicious precision. "Well," said Admiral Petros, straightening his uniform with the air of someone determined to pretend the last hour hadn't happened, "shall we continue with the trade negotiations?" The ship's AI provided a final commentary. Gravity generator reconciliation successful. They have agreed to communicate their needs more clearly in the future and have scheduled regular maintenance sessions. The atmosphere processors are very pleased with their mediation work. As the formal seating arrangement reasserted itself, Lyreley found herself glancing toward Jake with something that felt dangerously close to disappointment, that the intimate floating conversation had ended. The recreational deck had never been intended for diplomatic negotiations, but after the third gravity failure flooded the main conference chamber with emergency foam that smelled suspiciously like vanilla cake, everyone had relocated to what the ship's designers optimistically called the casual interaction space. Queen Lyreley sat cross-legged on one of the low-cushioned platforms, her formal robes replaced by simple traveling clothes that made her seem less like an intimidating galactic ruler, and more like someone Jake might encounter at a university coffee shop. If university coffee shops served beings with elegantly pointed ears that twitched whenever she found something amusing. "This beverage is extraordinary," Lyreley said, holding her third cup of coffee with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. Her ears had developed a subtle vibration that seemed to intensify with each sip, a phenomenon that Jake found both endearing and mildly concerning. The molecular structure creates such interesting neurochemical cascades. Is it true that humans consume this substance daily? Some humans consume it hourly, Ambassador Thorne replied, watching with fascination as Lyreley's ears began to flutter more rapidly. "Though perhaps we should consider moderating your intake. You appear to be experiencing some unusual physiological responses." Unusual. Lyreley's voice had risen half an octave, and her words came with machine-gun precision. "This is marvelous. I can feel individual quantum fluctuations in the ship's hull plating. Did you know that the Concordia's structural integrity has 17 different harmonic frequencies? They're singing a most delightful mathematical progression right now." Jake exchanged glances with Admiral Petros, who had the look of someone wondering whether caffeinated alien royalty constituted a diplomatic incident. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "perhaps we could discuss the proposed research exchanges while we're all feeling energized." Research exchanges, yes. Lyreley's ears were now vibrating so quickly they appeared blurred. "Our quantum consciousness studies could revolutionize your understanding of space-time manipulation, and your coffee technology could revolutionize our understanding of everything. Why have we never established cultural exchange programs focused on recreational stimulants?" The ship's AI interjected with what sounded like electronic concern. "Medical Bay reports unusual quantum signatures emanating from the recreational deck. Preliminary scans suggest either a minor spacetime distortion or someone is experiencing caffeine-induced enlightenment. Should I prepare an intervention?" "No intervention necessary," called out Chef Brixby, a Martian colonist whose appearance suggested equal parts culinary genius and mad scientist. He emerged from the deck service kitchen carrying a tray of what appeared to be glowing spheres. "I've prepared a fusion appetizer, specifically designed to complement the current dietary situation. Terran coffee beans infused with Zephyrian harmony crystals and wrapped in synthesized Andromedan cloud moss." The silence that followed was profound. Several humans looked like they were questioning the life choices that had led them to this moment, while the Zephyrian delegation appeared genuinely intrigued by the glowing food. "Chef Brixby," Ambassador Thorne said with admirable diplomatic restraint, "are those safe for human consumption?" "Define safe," Brixby replied cheerfully. "They won't kill you, and they might temporarily allow you to perceive quantum probability waves with your naked eyes. Side effects include possible telepathic communication with the ship's navigation computer, and an irresistible urge to compose poetry about mathematical concepts." Admiral Petros reached for one of the spheres with the expression of someone who had survived worse things during his military career. "At this point, I'm willing to try anything that might help these negotiations make sense." Lyreley, meanwhile, had moved on to examining the recreational deck's entertainment systems, with the intense focus of someone whose perception had been chemically enhanced. "Your holographic projection matrices are fascinating," she announced, her ears now moving in complex patterns that seemed almost like sign language. "They're creating interference patterns with the ship's quantum field generators. If we adjusted the harmonic frequencies by approximately 0.3 terahertz, we could probably generate actual pocket dimensions for entertainment purposes." "Pocket dimensions?" Jake asked, finding himself drawn into conversation with her despite, or perhaps because of, her caffeinated enthusiasm. "Small-scale reality bubbles," she explained, turning to face him with eyes that seemed to sparkle with internal light. "Imagine being able to create temporary spaces with altered physical laws. Zero-gravity dance floors, time-dilated reading rooms, gravity-reversed swimming pools where the water floats in the air, and people swim through empty space." Jake felt a smile tugging at his lips. "That sounds like the most elaborate amusement park in the galaxy." "Exactly." Lyreley's ears performed what could only be described as a happy dance. "Recreation should challenge the fundamental assumptions of reality. Why accept boring physics when you can have entertaining physics?" Chef Brixby had apparently taken her enthusiasm as encouragement, and was now distributing the glowing spheres to volunteers from both delegations. The first human brave enough to try one, a junior trade attaché, immediately began humming in mathematical progressions while his eyes took on the same sparkly quality as Lyreley's. "This is either the most successful cultural exchange in galactic history or the most spectacular diplomatic disaster," Admiral Petros observed, though he was smiling as he said it. The glowing sphere he'd consumed seemed to have relaxed his usually rigid demeanor considerably. The ship's communication system crackled to life, with an announcement that suggested the AI had also been affected by whatever quantum field enhancement was occurring. "Attention all consciousness-bearing entities. The navigation computer has requested that someone please explain why it's suddenly receiving empathic impressions from the recreational deck. It's particularly concerned about the intense emotional resonance emanating from grid coordinates 72 by 15. 8. Jake realized with a start that those coordinates corresponded exactly to where he and Lyreley were sitting. He looked at her questioningly, only to find her staring back with an expression of dawning awareness that matched his own. "The caffeine appears to have amplified your natural quantum consciousness fields," she said, her voice returning to normal speed though her ears continued their subtle vibrations. "Combined with the harmony crystals in Chef Brixby's creation, we may have accidentally created a localized empathic field." "Meaning?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Meaning," Lyreley said, her ears shifting to that familiar rose color, that everyone in this room can probably sense the emotional resonance between us. Ambassador Thorne cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps this would be an excellent time to test those pocket dimension entertainment concepts you mentioned, Your Majesty. I have a feeling we're going to need somewhere private to continue these discussions. The navigation computer's voice echoed through the speakers with electronic bewilderment. Could someone please explain why my sensors are detecting what appears to be a romantic subplot developing in Sector 7? My programming didn't include protocols for processing interpersonal drama, and it's causing recursive loops in my decision-making matrices. The Crisis Command Center's holographic displays painted everyone's faces in shifting red and blue as proximity alarms shrieked through the Concordia's corridors. Queen Lyreley stood before the tactical array, her pointed ears sharp with concentration as she coordinated defensive positions with Admiral Petros, while Jake monitored communication channels that crackled with reports of 3 rogue fleet vessels closing fast on their position. Their quantum torpedoes will breach our shields in approximately 12 minutes, Admiral Petros announced with the calm of someone who had faced worse odds, though his knuckles were white as he gripped the command console. Unless we can boost power to the defensive matrices by at least 40%. The harmony crystals in the cargo bay, Lyreley said, her fingers dancing across the alien interface she jury-rigged to communicate with the ship's systems. If we can create a resonance feedback loop between the Zephyrian power cores and your fusion reactors, we might be able to generate the boost we need. Jake found himself watching her work with the same intense focus he'd maintained throughout their diplomatic sessions. But now, he understood what that focus meant. Not mere professional interest, but something deeper that he'd been afraid to name until this moment when time was running out. Her ears flickered between their normal pale color and the rose flush he'd learned to associate with her emotional responses, and he realized she was struggling with the same awareness that had been building between them for days. "Captain Morrison," she said without looking up from her calculations, "why are you looking at me like that, human?" The words slipped out before royal protocol could stop them, her voice carrying a mixture of exasperation and vulnerability that cut through the Crisis Command Center's tension like quantum lightning. Around them, tactical officers continued their urgent work, but Jake felt as if the universe had narrowed to just the two of them floating in a bubble of suspended time. "Because," he said, abandoning every diplomatic training protocol he'd ever learned, "I've never watched someone carry the weight of 2 civilizations with such grace. And because I'm terrified that we won't get another chance to figure out what this connection between us actually means." The ship's AI chose that moment to provide commentary with its usual impeccable timing. Emotional resonance detected in Command Center has reached quantum entanglement levels. Should I begin playing romantic background music, or would dramatic battle music be more appropriate for current circumstances? "Both," Admiral Petros called out without taking his eyes off the tactical display. "We're apparently fighting for love and galaxies simultaneously. Might as well have a proper soundtrack." Lyreley's ears flushed completely rose, and Jake felt something flutter in his chest that he recognized with shock as the synchronization she'd mentioned. His heartbeat adjusting to match the rhythm of hers, as if their cardiac systems were quantum entangled across the space between species. "The resonance cascade is working," she said, though her voice had become slightly breathless. "Power levels are increasing, but the harmony crystals are responding to the emotional quantum field we're generating. The stronger the connection between us becomes, the more power they're able to channel." "You're saying our feelings are literally powering the ship's defenses?" Jake asked, moving closer to help her monitor the energy readings. "I'm saying," Lyreley replied, her ears now practically glowing with rose light, "that the universe has a sense of humor that makes Chef Brixby's fusion cuisine look subtle." The rogue fleet vessels launched their attack precisely as the power boost reached critical levels, their quantum torpedoes streaking across the holographic display like angry stars. The Concordia's enhanced shields absorbed the impact with a resonant hum that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the coffee and harmony crystal enhanced quantum consciousness field still permeating the ship. Direct hit, no damage, Admiral Petros reported with satisfaction. Whatever you two are doing, keep doing it. The quantum consciousness research was correct, Lyreley said, her scientific excitement overriding diplomatic propriety as she watched the energy reading spike with each synchronized heartbeat. Emotional connections create measurable effects on local space-time. We're accidentally proving my entire dissertation thesis while saving both our diplomatic delegations. Jake laughed, a sound that seemed to resonate through the ship's quantum fields and make the harmony crystals sing louder. Only you would find a way to conduct groundbreaking research during a battle. The second wave of attacks came and went, repelled by shields that grew stronger as the connection between them deepened. By the third attack, the rogue fleet vessels began retreating, apparently deciding that whatever defensive technology the diplomatic vessel had developed wasn't worth the continued assault. "Stand down from battle stations," Admiral Petros announced, "though I'm curious whether our defense system is going to require permanent emotional supervision." Chef Brixby's voice crackled over the intercom. "If anyone's interested, I've just invented a new dish inspired by today's events. Synchronized cardiac souffle with quantum entanglement reduction. It's guaranteed to either strengthen emotional bonds or create localized time paradoxes." Lyreley turned to face Jake fully, her ears settling into a graceful arch that spoke of confidence rather than nervous energy. "Captain Morrison, Jake, I believe we've accidentally discovered something that's going to change more than just our defensive capabilities." "The peace accords?" he asked, though he suspected she meant something far more personal. "The fundamental understanding of how consciousness interfaces with quantum mechanics," she said with a smile that transformed her from intimidating galactic ruler to someone he could imagine spending years getting to know. "Though I suppose the peace accords will benefit too, considering we've just demonstrated that human-Zephyrian cooperation can literally power starships." Ambassador Thorne cleared his throat diplomatically. "Speaking of the peace accords, I believe we have some new clauses to add regarding joint consciousness research and the proper protocols for emotionally enhanced defensive systems." The ship's AI provided final commentary. "Navigation computer reports that romantic subplot has resolved successfully and is no longer causing recursive loops in decision-making matrices. However, it would like to know if this is going to be a regular occurrence, as it may need to upgrade its emotional processing capabilities." Jake reached for Lyreley's hand, feeling the quantum resonance between them settle into something steady and permanent. "I think," he said, "we're going to need to establish some new diplomatic protocols for interspecies relationships that can power starships." "Agreed," Lyreley said, her ears performing what could only be called a victory dance. "Though I insist we include regulations about coffee consumption during sensitive negotiations. I'm still not entirely sure what happened on the recreational deck, but I have 18 new ideas for improving interstellar travel that I'll never remember once the caffeine wears off." Admiral Petros looked around the command center with the expression of someone whose universe had fundamentally shifted. "Well," he said finally, "I've seen stranger things end wars. At least this one might actually be sustainable."